Hello folks, my name is PixelBitG, and I wanted to put this video together to talk about Sony's refusal to allow name changes on their network and people supporting that refusal. So I'm going to preface this rant with it's 2018, so stop defending anti-consumer nonsense. It doesn't help the industry and it makes you look like a shill. If you are defending Sony's inability or refusal to allow name changes, stop it now. It's silly. It's a basic function at best. So let's talk about data for a minute. Any decent database administrator follows a few simple rules as they develop a system. We try to create tables that are representative of the data it relates to and nothing else. Whenever data from table A is used in table B and C, we try to make it so that we do not repeat the text-based data in any other table. For instance, if I have a name table, in this case, a PSN ID, I do not want to include your name in the PSN address table. So what I do is I create a PSN ID table as follows. I'll have a PSN ID, I'll have a PSN name, I may have something like a creation date. Both of these values in this instance would be unique, but the PSN ID is the key to this PSN table. This is important, so keep that in mind. To maintain the integrity of data, when I create my PSN address table, I do as follows. I'll create a PSN address. I'll then create an address ID. We'll call it add ID. We'll then have a country, a city, a state, address 1, address 2, a zip or something applicable, and then we will again have the PSN ID. So this acts as what's called a foreign key. What the foreign key means is that it's required in this table, but it does not belong to this table. It still belongs to the PSN table and behaves as a reference to that table. So you're asking, so why Pixel? Simple. Now I do not have to carry your name to the address table, copying that same data. Instead, I carry a PSN ID only to that table. This serves two purposes. One, I can maintain this unchanging ID across all tables that need to relate back to the PSN table, like trophies and payment data. And then two, I have a reference to your name, allowing me to modify your name without impacting any other data that needs your PSN ID. This is how you affect the name change. So let's say that we want to look back at your trophies. What data should be in that table? It's pretty easy. The data should be similar to the following. And mind you, this is just me mocking this stuff up, just based on my knowledge of database management. So here's your PSN trophies table. There's a trophy ID, which is unique to the trophy table. There's a game ID, right? It's also going to act as a foreign key. It's related to a game table. We're not going to outline what that table is, but let's just say that table has an ID and it has a bunch of information that's related to the games. There's then your PSN ID again. Remember that guy? He's acting as a foreign key in this table. So instead of carrying your name, I'm carrying that ID and only that ID to this table. That's your reference from this table back to the original PSN table. I'll then have my trophy name, levels, and the additional information that describes your trophy information. So once again, I have another table, and my trophies are maintaining a relationship with the PSN table, assuming games have a unique ID and their corresponding trophies do as well. So we only need IDs of those things here, and we can tally total trophies and such from here. Just link them back to your ID. So what I'm showing here is how properly designed a database comes together, following what's known as Boyce Codd normal form, or to some form of that, maybe up to the third normal form. And if you want information on that, I'll leave a link on what Boyce Codd is and how it's utilized within database management systems. But note that the concept of Boyce Codd was created in the 1970s, right? Everyone uses it. It's the standard. So PSN was created in, I don't know, the late 2000, early 2000s. So there's no way, well, I mean, they should not have created their system not using unique IDs, not using some type of normal form, and not duplicating your names across other tables. So it really should just be one place, and then there's IDs everywhere where you have to update them. Okay, so now we know how it's supposed to be done. But let's assume that Sony didn't do that. Instead, their key is in their PSN tables is actually your name. Ignoring that obviously it's a no-no in table design, and it's poorly written. You're asking, well, hey, is it possible to change your name in that scenario? Well, I'm glad you asked. Yes, it's still possible to change your name in that scenario. It does make things a little bit harder, but depending on the number of tables impacted, SQL has a way to deal with that poor design. So we'll get into that in a second. Now, for this section, things are going to get a little bit more technical, but I have some pseudocode images up for you, so you can take a look at it and sort of walk along with me as I explain how you would change a name in both of these scenarios. So the first scenario is if the database was created, properly using a form of normalization, and you're really only focusing on IDs, whereas the name in an account is really just a extension of the ID and is not the key of the table. So in that scenario, you see here we have these two declare statements are actually me creating variables, and then the next are me assigning some values to the variables. Now, again, this is just pseudocode. It's just so that you can understand what I'm talking about here. So I'm gonna set the replace old ID equal to 1, right? Which tells me in this case it's gonna be the first record. We're gonna modify the name on the first record. We're gonna create the select replace old name and set that to this is your new name. So this is the name that we're going to assign to that particular record. What I'm doing is here on line 10 is I am beginning what's called a transaction. Now, a transaction is more important in the second scenario than it is the first, but I'm using it in both because it just so you can see what it does. So what a transaction means is any statements that occur within a transaction can be rolled back, meaning you can temporarily make the change, and then if something goes wrong, you can say, okay, I don't want to keep this change, let's get rid of it. This is going to be important in the next scenario because there are more than one tables affected because the name exists in more than one place. So in this case, what we have here is I'm going to just say update the PSN table dot name. PSN table is the table we're talking about. That's the main table. The name is the field that I want to impact. And then we're going to set the name to the replace old name, which is going to be this is your new name, which is on line 6, where the PSN ID, right, remember that's the key, is the replace old ID. So in this case, where PSN ID is equal to 1. So it's going to set that first record to 1, and then it's going to say, okay, this is okay, it worked, commit the transaction, and now your name has changed. So what happened in this scenario is every other place where your ID is used is not impacted because they don't care. They only care about the ID so they can have a reference back to the PSN table. They're not worried about the name that's related to your ID. So for them, it doesn't matter. For the PSN table, your name has officially changed. And now, anytime that the PSN name is used throughout the application, your new name will appear. It's really just as simple as that. So now, in the case where Sony would have used a name throughout their tables as opposed to using an ID, how much harder is it to make that kind of modification? So if you see now on screen, what we have is basically the same function, but instead of using the ID now we're just going to use the names. So starting on line 28, you see I'm declaring replace old name, and I'm declaring a variable for replace new name. I then need to know what the old name was and then what the new name should be. The major difference here is that I'm no longer using the ID because they didn't, in the case where you didn't use the ID. Below that, we begin our transaction, and now instead of one table being impacted, we're going to impact all 3 tables because the name exists in all 3 of them. Which is, like I said before, is poor design, but it's still manageable because using what is known as a transaction, as I said before, is I can impact all 3 of these tables, make the modification of the change, verify that all 3 occurred without any issue, and commit them together as a transaction, so it goes as one package. If one of them fails, then on line 44, we catch the failure, and then we say, hey, if the transaction count is greater than 0, meaning that one of the tables was updated, we'll then just roll back the entire set and raise an error and save it to a log or whatever, right? So that basically is used to protect the integrity of the database. That way you don't have a partial modification in one part and then the other parts aren't updated, which in this case which would be disastrous because, like I said, the trophies and address may be relying on the name in the PSN table, right? Using it as a foreign key. So if you look at line 39, it's basically the same thing, right? So we're going to update the PSN table. We're going to set the name to the new name, which is replace new name, which is this is your new name, where the name equals this is your old name. And then we do the same thing for the trophy and the address because that way they all stay with the same data. So, like I said earlier, while I am making it simpler than it's supposed to be, the reality is it really isn't that complicated a modification. And it's something well within Sony's power to do if they chose to do it. The question is why they don't choose to do it. So I say all that to say this. PSN is a paid service that many of us have been paying for years. As a consumer, you should be entitled to a name change. And I'm not saying entitled the way some gamers behave entitled. I'm just talking about it's a service. And if you want your name changed, they should have a way of providing you a name change, even if it costs you money. And that's fine. If Sony wants to charge you for a name change, I'm all for it, right? It's a service. It's something that they have to do extra beyond their normal operation procedure. And, hey, it could be a revenue stream for them if they want to use it. It doesn't matter. It's not one of those things where they would have to write this kind of code over and over again. You basically create a procedure or a function, and you run that function with some additional logging whenever someone requests it. And then you set a time limit on how often they can or cannot do it. The same way that Microsoft is currently doing it. The same way Twitter does it, right? I'm sure Twitter has a unique ID as well, because when you modify a name on Twitter, you do not your account doesn't you don't lose any data from your account. The same thing with Microsoft. You don't lose any of your achievements. Your name just modifies, and everything carries over with it, as well as your all transactions, anything you purchased, any subscriptions you have, they all just carry forward, because that's good database management. So let's stop defending nonsense, people. It's silly. Okay? Thanks. This is Pixel G, signing out.